You'll notice that our title was In Your Mirror, I Know Myself. And Kevin has already referred to a number of the things that we're going to touch on today. And I went looking for an image because as we started talking about this, one of the first things Amer said was that in Arabic, the pupil of the eye, and that word is
Insan.
Insan,
Yeah.
means human being. And that really resonated with me because in all the work we do in training language teachers, both in the certificate at the undergrad and in the master's, as teachers, we expect our teachers to be good teachers and language learners. And also in terms of intercultural communication, we begin with understanding ourselves, using different lenses to look and know yourself in order to know others. And I saw this image and I thought, there is the pupil of the eye, and reflected in that someone taking a photograph of someone, of themselves. And it was this who is who, and who's me and who's you, and really aren't we all interconnected? And that really gave me this kind of lead in to a couple of things that I want to touch on. So I want to begin, I'm going to come back to the reflection and the mirroring, but I thought it'd be a good way to begin. We've all accomplished one miracle in our lives, at least one, and that was learning our mother tongues. So I want to ask you, a friend of mine said to me, you better actually begin by telling everybody that English is your mother tongue. And I was kind of a bit insulted, And she said, well, you do speak a variety of it. And I said, okay. So who shares with me, not maybe my variety, but who has English as their mother tongue? Just let's... I'm just looking, most of us. Is there anybody here who has a language other than English as a mother tongue, the first language they learned? Great. So what was your mother tongue?
Actually, there are three of them. So English is a mother tongue in India, just because there are so many languages. I grew up with Hindi and Urdu.
And, Amer?
I grew up with Punjabi and Urdu, so Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, yeah.
So we've got a couple of simultaneous multilinguals here, which is great.
From the same area, yeah.
So now the next question I want to ask is, how many of you, Kevin said he studied, he was quick to correct, studied 9 languages. But I'm going to say, how many of you have access to or know something of at least one other language? Hands up. Oh, good. Do at least 2 other languages. 3. Shall we just go more than 3? And we won't embarrass us by going all the way through to 9. That's wonderful. And we've got great collective memories here. And I'm going to ask you to draw on those memories and that knowledge that you have, because you do have those other souls. And more than souls, you have dispositions, you have ways of viewing the world that those languages have given you access to. Oh, this goes back to me again, and proving that my mother tongue is English. I just wanted to let you know, in South Africa, we have 11 official languages. And by official, I really mean official. Legal documents, any documents. When we did the new curriculum, post-apartheid, it had to be written in all 11 languages. Exactly. I mean, it's a lot of money. Just think of the paper, the translation. But we have gifted multilinguals in South Africa. And my language does feature there. It is. It's a mother tongue. It's one of them. So moving from that, the US is a multilingual country as well, but you don't have an official language. It's kind of assumed to be English. Lots of assumptions around that with a changing population. So I want to go back to the miracle that I referred to, that we've all accomplished in our lives, and that was the miracle of learning our mother tongue. Neuroscience has opened up this field of language learning because of brain imaging using magnetoencephalography. Big word, just MEG for short. But it's really opened up the brain for us. And some things that we thought we knew, but now that we've got concrete evidence. This is little Emma, and they've got her in an MEG, and literally they're tracking what's happening in her brain. And she's listening to lots of different languages. And don't worry, they weren't interfering with her brain in any way. She was perfectly free and she could move around. And this research is being done by Patricia Kuhl at the University of Washington. But by having her in that, they could see every time she heard her mother tongue, in this case it was English, she was in Seattle, they could see the little brain lighting up. And the interesting thing is that this brain is a citizen of the world. It will absorb data for any language it's exposed to. For the first not even year of its life. 7 months is the optimum period. After 7 months, that's what happens. It doesn't mean to say you can't learn a language. Of course you can. But it's that infinite capacity to absorb data and just take it into a hard drive, sort it out, and eventually a language comes out. Because that's what happens with babies. And I wanted to begin with that because even at that stage, the other is critical. Because they've done more research and they thought, well, if we could expose a baby to, like our gentleman over here, a couple of languages in that early stage, and the same with Amer, they would be what we call simultaneous bi or multilinguals because they acquire those languages at the same time. Other languages are learned later on. But they thought, what happens if we expose little babies in Seattle to Mandarin for, bring Mandarin speakers in, let them be exposed to them, what'll happen? Well, and they compared them to babies in Taiwan. The first 7 months, the little brains lit up. Same thing happened with the babies in Taiwan as the babies in Seattle. So that was well and good. It kind of proved what they thought. They thought, well, what happens if we don't have people coming in and playing with the babies and talking Mandarin to them? Let's put them in front of a TV screen or a monitor. What happens then? Can you guess? Exactly. After 7 months, despite exposure, even up to 7 months, their little brains did not respond. And that's why I wanted to start with this, because even with mother tongues and with that infinite capacity that infants have, the human, the other being, the human being that we see reflected in the pupil of the eye is necessary. You can do all kinds of things afterwards, but that's critical. So, what happens when we learn another language? And it's after the first 7, 8 months of our life. Well, good news is, lots of you have managed to do it, and do it pretty well, and you've done it with a number of languages. And I looked at this image because I thought, yep, that looks at multiple levels. So we could look at the first thing we look for when we're learning another language is, what are the similarities and what is different? What sounds do I recognize? And what structures do I recognize? Or is it completely different? And Amer said to me, when, again, part of our initial discussion, when we were talking about this, Amer, what did you tell me?
Oh, I grew up speaking languages which are Indo-European, so Punjabi, Urdu, and English as well are Indo-European. But when I, in college, started learning Arabic, there was a period of time where I literally felt like my brain was being scrambled. I was even starting to trip over my mother tongue, so I could feel it. I wanted to say something, but something was not connecting. So there was a scrambling that took place, and it took a couple of years, but then it became fluent, and in a sense I had grown and incorporated that.
And this was one of the moments when my brain, that, as I told you, does these things, I leapt and I said, you're right, it was scrambled. Because that's exactly what happens when we learn another language. Perhaps scramble is a bit of a strong word. But now that we've got neuroscience and brain imaging to draw on, literally, new pathways are created, new neural connections, new synapses, or synapses start connecting in ways they hadn't before. So learning another language literally does use more of your brain and expands it. Anyone worried about Alzheimer's and the onset of dementia? Learn a language. We all know about the plasticity of the brain, but really, they say there are 3 things. Reading, great place to be here with the books. Drink a cup of coffee. I might have to do that because I'm not a big coffee drinker, but learn a language. They'd done studies in Sweden. They had students studying a new language, and they had other students working on really serious quantum physics problems. I tried to think of something really hard. I don't really know what the other mental work was, but it was cognitively difficult. And they found that the students who were learning another language, their brains literally grew. So cognitive demand alone doesn't do it, languages do. So so the one thing you can do learning another language is use more brain capacity and develop it. Of course, learning another language does give you, apart from another soul, which Amer will talk more about, it'll give you another way of looking at the world, or enabling you to see that there are other ways of being in the world, and they can both be right. As we have here, the one sees 3, the one sees 4. Who's right? They both are, if you look at them. It also enables you to experience the world through that language in different ways, depending on what worldviews are encompassed, and the way that language structures itself. And I chose this because I thought even a basic thing, think of the languages you know. How do you greet someone in those languages? What are the different ways? You know, good day, buongiorno, bonsoir. What struck me here was, amongst all the others, shalom. And I wanted to mention one from my home area, which is Zulu, the word sawubona. And when you greet somebody in Zulu, you'd say sawubona. And it literally means, I see you. So it's not saying good day, good evening, but I see you, Mary, and I acknowledge you, and my ancestors see yours. So you really bring somebody into existence. And having access to that kind of knowledge has got to expand who we are and add depth to us. And talking of worldviews, there are also worldviews that are held in words in the language, that as you learn the language, you get access to as well. And I'm not talking about linguistic relativity now or Sapir-Whorf, people who know about that, because there's been a lot of debate about it. It doesn't mean to say that if a word doesn't exist in your language that you can't understand the concept. Of course you can. But there are particular words that exist in languages that kind of filter all the way through it. And I chose these because they've just resonated with me in so many ways. In Maori in New Zealand, tahi means one. Katahi means singular. And kotahitanga means in one we are in unity. It's the interconnectedness of being. So all Maori legends begin with the earth and the sky. And everything is an offspring. So we're all connected. And I think that if we think about the world today, we think about sustainability of any kind, we think about peace. Knowing something of kotahitanga would be good. And in Greek, philotimo is also, I believe that the Greeks say this is part of their DNA. Is anyone here with a Greek background? Nick, thank you. And philotimo means it's respect and generosity and honor. And all Greeks really believe in that. Truth. And a lot of our philo comes, all our philosophy from the same stem. And in South Africa, well, not just South Africa, most of Africa, there's a notion of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And I also think that, thinking about that. So this has been a way of thinking about worldviews that are held in language that can expand us in learning it. And I wanted to give you an example of one of my students, who was the cohort after Nick, Jamie. She works at a refugee center in Ohio, and she's got a lot of Somali students there. And she said that just learning their language, or trying to learn it, has created such a lot of goodwill. But in particular, she was fascinated with Somali proverbs. And so she's made a point of learning them, and then they see what they mean in English. So for the Somali students, it's an acknowledgement of their culture. But it's also helped her understand them. She said a lot of the proverbs have to do with being nomadic and being pastoral, and cows feature prominently. This one, coming from Vermont, we should maybe learn a few of those. But she said she uses this one often, that a single finger does not wash a face. And in class, when she's trying to get them to work together cooperatively, she's able to draw on that. So it creates bonds between them. And so when we're thinking about what it means to know another, but really to know yourself through learning another language, we could use this diagram to think, here's my first language, and here's my way of being, and everything in that one. You could think of this pinky purpley color and the bluey color as other languages and other ways of being. But you could also think of those parts as how you expand and change when you use another language. And Kevin speaks Thai, and you can corroborate this or tell me that maybe it's not general. But if a friend of mine has spent 30-odd years working in Southeast Asia, and she speaks Thai and Lao pretty fluently. And her daughter said to her, you know, Mum, you smile so much more when you speak Thai. And Connie said, do I? And then realized it was true. And she said, well, the Thais smile. But she thought about it, and she thought, I'm happy when I speak Thai. But it's not only that, it's a case of the energy that we have. And if we are grouchy and grumpy, and that affects everybody. And part of the Thai way of being for her is maintaining face and smiling. And that's become part of who and what she is. And I'm sure you've got experiences as well where you can think of, I know when I speak German, which is not that much these days, but I happen to have been in a convent where there were German nuns and I learned the language, I feel organized. And I don't mean that much more so than in English, but I don't mean that stereotypically. I just mean when you've got declensions that tell you what's an indirect and a direct object and who's doing what to whom, how can you not be organized? And when I'm speaking French, who just wouldn't want to waltz around? My son doesn't speak French but visits there often, and I've been amused watching him. What he's picked up first has been the body language. So he's developed the Gallic shrug, and he'll stand there and be part of a conversation, and he's learned, he doesn't know what's going on, but he said, d'accord, d'accord. And the Norman, not we, but ouais, oh ouais, ouais. And you know, as a linguist and somebody who works in language acquisition, I've looked at that and just had to smile and think, yes, my darling, you're picking it up. But you know, you're picking up, it's expanding your being. You're starting with the shrug, but who knows where it might go. So on that note, I'm going to let Amer take over and just say that, you know, even if one's learning a language to delay dementia, to expand one's brain, there's some really very serious reasons that, particularly in light of what's happening in the world today, and after last Friday, I thought, please, you know, if language can be the way that we do develop, expand our souls and develop more understanding, let it be.
Great, yeah. Thank you, Ben.
I'll hand it over to you. I will be around.
Yes, thank you. It's so wonderful. It's been a really rewarding experience working together to come up with something that we wanted to share with our larger Marlboro community. It's just great to see all of you here. When we started talking about the idea of this presentation, Kathy asked us to think about the idea of the other. And that was really the starting theme. And in language learning, I've learned a few languages beyond my mother tongue, so I've experienced the difficulties that one goes through and the stages that one goes through in learning another language. So I specifically remember when I was learning Arabic. I had learned English growing up like Arthur did in India. It's so much part of the culture that really just you imbibe it. You know, it's the official language in Pakistan too, so you don't think about the rules as much. But I actually learned English grammar when I was studying for Arabic. In order to be able to make sense of Arabic, because it was being explained in terms of English, it was this very strange case where something I was familiar with was becoming clear, and something unfamiliar was being made clear through something I knew. And at the same time, of course, I was just automatically translating it into Urdu and Punjabi and comparing the structures. So just personally speaking, in terms of knowing languages, I feel like there's a sense in which the space in which you have to hold a thought is much greater. So there's a sense in which your attention needs to grow and your imagination needs to grow in order to hold multiple ways of saying the same thing, so that you can then compare and contrast that. I had not thought about this, but on the drive down I had thought about it, that in some ways what I want to walk us through, for us to do some work together, learn some things together, is actually another kind of language, which I find at Marlboro especially, that I think we're at a certain stage of our culture where a lot of students who come to Marlboro come without any religious understanding or have not grown up in a religious household. So in fact, taking a course in religion is learning a new language. And that's the way a lot of the students express it. I want to know how religious people think. And that has been the goal for me, is to allow people to be able to enter into another worldview through using the language of the tradition, which is usually brought out in the various concepts, images, scriptures, so a whole bunch of things go into it. So I was trying to think of the best way to introduce this style of thinking, and the thing that came to mind was, because I teach comparative religion, I specialize in Islam, but I teach comparative religion, so I'm always thinking of one religion in terms of other religions as well. And how do we think about metaphysics? But before I talk about metaphysics a little bit, I want to also bring out another aspect of the other, that in terms of knowing oneself through the other, learning another language, that definitely is explicit when we're learning a new language. But I also thought of moments which for me are very poignant, perhaps because of my temperament, but right now, as we're speaking, I'm expecting that I have to reach out and explain certain things. So the fact that you might not understand what I'm saying is present with me, so that's very clear. But there are certain moments, especially when I'm with friends, people that I feel very connected to, and I say something, and I see a look either in their body language or in their face, or they express something like, I didn't get that. Those moments are most poignant for me, in the sense that even before any thoughts form about it, it's a moment at which a certain distance is opened up, in which I'm able to see, oh, we are different. We were same, but we are different at the same time. And that's a kind of knowing, I feel, that language learning forces us to acknowledge specifically, but this need for the other, as Beverley pointed out, that even in learning our mother tongue, we need the other to be able to learn the language that is going to shape our brain and shape our thoughts. But at the same time, speaking the same language with people that are dear and near to us, a lot of times there's those moments at which a certain space is opened up of difference. So there's this movement between sameness and difference. You know, we are human beings, somebody speaks another language, French or German, but at the same time, we're expressing the same thing. But even in the same language, I think the same experience can be found. So I was thinking about the nature of that experience, how we need the other to know ourselves, and the kind of knowledge that is. So in thinking about metaphysics, I thought that one useful way and very palpable way to be able to grasp the way in which we might think of metaphysics, especially as it is presented in the classic texts of many traditions, like the Hindu tradition or the Gospel of John or Judaism or Islam, is the image of a tree. So this is, thanks to the web, you know, a very nice drawing of a tree. And the reason why I've incorporated this here is that I've always found it fascinating, ever since I found out how much the root system of a tree parallels the umbrella. The way the tree grows up is really paralleled by how deep its roots are. So there's a passage in the Katha Upanishads from the Hindu tradition that talks about the world tree, whose roots are in the heaven and whose branches are over here. So this would be, I think a very nice way to grasp what is meant by metaphysics. So the physics part is this part over here, which we feel, physis from the Greek, that which is palpable. And then the metaphysical part are the roots, really, out of which that which is physical is seen to be growing. So while Beverley was presenting the different dimensions of language learning, and as I was talking about what happens when we come to know the other, even while speaking the same language, That is a style of thinking that in which we start from the visible and work towards an abstract principle. So we think through, we abstract, we take away from the concrete. And metaphysics might be understood as a style of thinking where you start, you start from the top and you come down to the physical. So the world tree with its roots above and its branches below. And one of the things, I mean, like all symbols, all images, there's so much that can be said about it. But one thing that immediately comes to mind, living in Vermont, of course, where we tap our trees to make syrup out of them, is that the same sap flows through here all the way down. There's a sense in which there's a continuity, that this organic imagery allows us to be able to hold on to a unity among things that might not seem unified at first sight, something that might be invisible and something that's visible. So metaphysics, I think, is able to accomplish the connection of things that might initially seem quite distinct. And this is from the Jewish tradition. This is a wonderful stylized rendition of the tree of life. And I think it really brings the circular nature of it all around, how they're intertwined, and at some level, who's to know where the roots come out from the bottom and how the bottom reaches up and then comes down again. So I guess especially at this time where, as Kevin was pointing out, I mean, we're at a stage where there's a lot of need for learning about each other. And a lot of patience is needed. So this feels very opportune. I mean, I'm a specialist in Islamic studies and Islamic mysticism, contemplative traditions within Islam. So I tend to go to it when I think of these ideas. But here is the Arabic. We start this way, come down, read it out. Arabic is written from right to left. It's the pronoun who. It means he from the Quran. And just in Arabic language too, it's a male pronoun, who. It is seen to refer to the divine essence. And the word who, I think, is very appropriate for thinking about metaphysics because it allows us a way to actually go beyond words and be able to see how actually words come about, how even language comes about. So if you were to say, let's, Susan's here, so Susan asked for doing something together, so let's do this together. If we would all say a who together. Can we, please? Who. And now just turn that into any word. While saying who, say some word that you think of. Who here, yes. So the word who, if you notice, it's undifferentiated. Who.
Yeah.
It starts from the middle of our belly, the scholars say in the Islamic tradition, and it comes out through our mouth without it having any part of the lips or any part of articulation. But it's the same undifferentiated sound which we then articulate into a specific word. So there's that same sense of unity. So a word that we speak already has the breath within it. The who is present in every word that we speak. And here we get a picture. I apologize for the the pixelation here, but it was a very small print, but I did want to use it. This is taken from Rumi's tomb in Konya in Turkey. And this is a reflected who. So you see the who is over here, and then there's a reflected who over here. And this encapsulates Islamic metaphysics. And maybe if we have time, I might also speak of the Gospel of John in this way as well, since Reverend Father Mark Gensler is here today. In thinking about the other, the metaphysical principles are to go back to the root. And the root of everything is God. So if God's essence is denoted by the word who, then this is denoting and showing, symbolizing in pictorial form what the situation of the other is. So the question of why is it that the world was created, as answered in the Sufi tradition, in the contemplative tradition, using a saying of Prophet Muhammad, in which he says, Prophet David asked God, Muhammad is relating, that Prophet David asked God, God, why did you create the world? And he said, I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known. So I created creatures so that I might be known. And in explaining this idea of the hidden treasure. We can see the hidden treasure is the root, it's the who, all the words, if you think of the sound that we just made, the who, all potential words are present within that one undifferentiated sound, even at the physical level. Just like the sea, all the kinds of forms that ice might take at the pole under certain conditions are present within the water. So I was the hidden treasure, and I love to be known, so I created creatures so that I might be known. So there's a desire at the heart of creation in this way of thinking. There's a yearning, a longing to know oneself. And why is that? Ibn al-Arabi, a 13th century Muslim mystic and scholar, says that because one's knowledge of oneself in oneself is not the same as one's knowledge of oneself in another, which becomes for one as if a mirror. So the other, from this perspective, the root cause for creation is the need for knowing oneself, and for knowing that oneself, the other is needed. So creation is created. And within creation, the human being, as Bev was pointing out, the word for human being in Arabic is insan, and insan means the pupil of the eye, where if we get close enough to a friend or a beloved, we can see our own image reflected. So all things in creation are manifesting something of the hiddenness, the potentiality that was present in this essence, in this mysterious thing that we cannot even say anything. All we can say is the sound of a who. There's nothing, it's just undifferentiated. All of those were present here. So each thing in creation in this style of thinking is a word or is a mirror that reflects something of the source back to itself. And the human being is the most comprehensive mirror, because in the human being, many, many qualities of creation are brought together. The wrath of animals, I talked with students a lot, the potato-ness of being a couch potato when you sit in front of something. When we start talking qualitatively, we see that we go through a qualitative, it is possible for us to go through a qualitative way of being in which we might be still as a stone, solid as a stone. But these qualities outside, we are able to take them for a moment and move on. So here is a calligraphy. We have the same word who over here, which is reflected back. And then this is the word Allah. And Allah, from the perspective of the contemplatives and Islamic scholarship, is the most comprehensive attribute or name that brings together all the possibilities and all possible qualities, like mercy, wrath, forgiveness, life. So Allah encompasses all of those qualities. So in some ways, if you were to think of this right side as pre-creation, then all of these potentialities were present, and through the desire of it to know itself, the world was created in which these possibilities start showing themselves in time. But it's present all at one time, just like in our breath, all words are present. At one moment, different things are pointed out. So this is who Allah, and then the reflected back form of who Allah is going over there. This was a big breakthrough for me when I came to it. Now going back to the Gospel of John, in the literal Greek version, it says, "In the beginning was the Word," and I think it's beginning from this side. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was towards God, and God was what the Word was, and through it was created everything that was created." So I think a similar work process is going on over here. This notion of the desire for creation and the need for the Word and how creation takes place. So I think in terms of bringing this to a close, I just wanted to mention a couple of points. One is that I think being able to learn another language shows us something about almost the plasticity, not just of our brain, but also of our deepest core in some ways. So whatever the human substance is able to inhabit many different languages. It is as if words are like clothes that we put on meanings when we know more than one language. So what is it that is putting on, doing the work of putting on? So there's something about ourselves that we learn through encountering the other, just as, through reading literature, when we enter the world of another, even an imaginative world, we leave behind something, we're able to inhabit something else. So I think from the metaphysical perspective of thinking, the reason why the other is so important and we need the other to know is that the very reason for creation was the other. Without the other, there is no self-knowledge, and that we are all interconnected. And there's something about us that is able to reach out and connect with others, and at the same time be able to see our similarity and our difference. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Just a few comments and questions, and we'll have more time during the reception. But does anyone have a question or a comment that you'd like to bring to Amer and Bev and the rest of us?
Greg, one towards Beverley and Ms. Burkett. Do you believe, I think I read somewhere, Noam Chomsky said that when a baby is lying in bed and babbling, what he's doing is translating the universal baby language into the language of the place he's at. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. The baby's experimenting. It's been analyzing the data. It's been coming in, taking statistics. And the babble are the first attempts to get those muscles to begin to make those sounds to which they'll attach meaning. Yes, babble is important, and baby talk is important.
If I may,
Yes.
use the who in Arabic, and who is also in Hebrew.
Exactly.
Very often used to denote the supreme being.
Exactly.
He
Right.
was, he is, he will be. And it's probably the same word. I've always asked which came first, Arabic and Hebrew. And nobody wants to answer that.
Both arose together, I think. Yes, I think, and the unpronounced word, God's name, definitely the YHWH, it has that sense of the breath, that is the mystery. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Behind you, Kathy. Yeah.
It just so happens that today on National Public Radio, I heard a story about a brain scientist who had a massive stroke. And as a result of the stroke, she lost all language. She woke up, first she felt it going away. She said she felt the chatter of language depart from her, felt panic. And then when she woke up, it was just all gone, as was all her memory. But differently from what you might expect, she did not feel panic. What she felt instead was great peace and an enormous joy. Because now she's recovered. It only took 8 years for her to recover from this. But what she suggested is that originary language acquisition, when the baby's neurons are lighting up, as you said, is also an act of constituting a self that is an individual, a sort of hermetic self, which went away when she lost language, and she was in the moment completely, in the way that Buddhists spend years trying to get to be.
Right.
And language, when language came back to her, she experienced it both as a gain in terms of her ability to communicate with her fellow human beings, but she also felt it and still feels it as a loss, which suggests to me that there may be something actually anti-metaphysical about the acquisition of language.
Yes. Yeah. May I? Yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to say touche.
I think the goal, if one were to think of religious traditions, and especially the contemplative traditions, the goal is to differentiate and then return while being able to keep the differentiation there. So the Taoists use the idea of pu, which is an uncarved block of wood, which is very much in keeping with what we're talking about, that a child at birth is an uncarved block of wood. And they use the infant as an example of somebody, a being in whom virtue and power are together, like the way the infant is able to grasp, is just so strong because there's no obstruction there. So from that perspective, language is an obstruction. But the path to return doesn't mean that you lose language. In a sense, the pathway from the coming after an individualized identity is opened up again, so that now that reality, the joy that was there, is flowing throughout all the branches, if you may speak of it this way, that have been created throughout this organism.
If we could hear from someone who hasn't spoken, and just maybe time for one more. Homer never lets go. You notice that?
When I initially saw the eye, it really reminded me of the Escher techniques.
Yes.
the Douglas Hobson book, Beverley Burkett, which talks about the self-reflectivity, but not sort of from one person to another, but sort of like defining the self as sort of self-reflective process. Is there any, I mean, what do you think about how the role of language is playing that, or how, is there any cultural tradition that ties into it?
I'm thinking about that self-reflectivity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all language, as you're using it, is a form of reflection, but I do think that we need, I'm thinking what the other gentleman had to say, that we in a way need to stand back from it, that when you're in it, it's really difficult to see it. So reflecting on anything requires kind of slowing it down. And I'm not sure, I was thinking of Escher's work, and I'm hoping that I have the same image in mind that what you had there, in terms of the complexity of things and how things are mirrored, but they don't necessarily mirror what is. It might be mirrored differently. So I don't think I'm answering that, but I may be putting more questions out.
I think the example I was trying to suggest the same point, that in a conversation in the same language is that moment of self-reflectivity. That, and I'm thinking of that exact moment, which is pre-verbal, I think. It's a moment of awareness where you've said something and there's a realization, and it's instantaneous, of, oh, they didn't get it, or we're not similar. So there's a moment of being able to see yourself in a different light. So there's a space that's opened up in that scenario. The other is there. You see yourself that was not understood, and there's a part of you that's seeing that. So I think those, in some ways, those are the moments that need to be expanded if we want to be able to be more cognizant of how it is that, of who we are really, ultimately. In that moment that we realize that we are not what we thought we were. But then, there might be other moments too. Yeah.
So let's thank Amer and Bev once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Bev.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Beverley and Amer. It's really wonderful to meet you in this context. Your talk actually got me thinking about what I teach, because I teach literature and creative writing, and of course that's all about communication. And I think a lot of your discussion was about metaphor. And metaphor is really sort of the glue, I think of it as the glue of understanding and of language, right? So one thing in the teaching of creative writing that's sort of peculiar is that you have to teach people how to write most distinctively in order to connect with other people. And some people have difficulty with this concept because they think, well, wouldn't just a cliche or a really general word work a lot better, like love? And then, we're like, no, because actually your love is probably a lot different than my love. And so to give that a picture in a poem is probably, that's sort of the most important step you can take in literature, in any literature. So one thing about also learning the craft of writing is that you read a lot of other writers, and you see how they communicate, and you see how you have to and want to differentiate yourself from them with your language. Because the more distinctive you are, the more actually different you are, the more successfully you communicate. And sort of the more, I guess, like passionately and intellectually and emotionally you can communicate to your reader. And Kathy, who, this is your brainchild, right? The Marlboro on the Road. I mean, I think we just came back from a huge reunion. How many people did we have at this reunion? How many? 85, yeah, from our year. A colleague, actually a fellow alum of ours passed away about a year and a half ago, and we got back together sort of on a group on Facebook, and we eventually brewed into this really amazing reunion that was followed by a deep depression for all of us, because we were just like, we all wanted to go back to Marlboro, like we were like next weekend. So with this, anyway, Kathy asked me to read this poem because she felt that this poem would metaphorically or topically relate to this talk. And I think she's right, because the poem is called An Etiquette for Eyes. So obviously it's about eyes. And you began your talk talking about the eye. And I'm going to sort of give you, because we're all here, it's the poem, its autobiographical root or impulse is basically, how do I put this and sound eloquent? Basically, I had a mad crush on another poet who was kind of like a nature poet, and I'm not a nature poet. And he's like a Kentucky poet. He's quite famous. And so he, I really liked him. And one thing I liked about him was his poetry. And our poetry was very different yet similar, but he was a great poet. So that to me was very attractive. And so to make a long story short, I bought him a drink at a conference, and he proceeded to have this drink with someone else, right? And so thereupon, I wrote many poems. And this was only one of them, and it's this moment is actually touched upon a lot in the book, and like but what I was thinking about it is about communication, and it's about communication gone awry, and it is about a desire for connection. And I thought it would be interesting to know that it's sort of like this is sort of one poet to another, right? And thanks for having me. An etiquette for eyes. I don't know if I wore glasses when I met you, but I know the last time I saw you drank a drink I bought you with another woman who was far uglier than I have ever been. I have brown eyes, did I tell you? Your eyes are too blue, tell all awful, and too pretty. You make all the girls swoon, and then lament how harpies pound on your door, plucking the very shingles off your roof, conducting through their unanimous will a plot to kill your hive's queen. Fix a hose from the car's tailpipe to pump barnyard dread straight into your ken. Therefore you demand I ought never to wish to lie in your bed. I have black eyes, did I tell you? But your eyes are damp blue, fingers in winter blue, worrying about a prom date blue, never washed a dish blue. Have I mentioned my eyes are dead brown, dirt brown, stone brown, done with you brown, screaming out in the streets I'm so drunk brown. I'm just ignoring the noise rising up from the streets asleep brown, as brown as dead leaves, because my love's eyes were dead brown. And when he shouted down at that drunk on the street that New Year's Eve from my third-floor window, that drunk man called him Whiskey Whore Boy. And his eyes were not wish-wash blue. His eyes were mostly moss and trees, not mojitos in a bar room. No, his eyes all gin-lit in a hotel room on our last night were ice-cold. Even in his farewell he was bold. His eyes anyone might have called plain, but they could at least cry. I am sick to death of your blue eyes, fabric eyes, flower eyes. I have brown eyes, plain and saying eyes behind thick frames, glassy eyes handing themselves over to you in buckets eyes. Dig your hands into my black soil eyes, my ugly eyes reaching into your eyes for my twin eyes. Look back at my eyes while your eyes crawl the walls, cloud blue, wandering off as milky bosom maids will look away from the eyes that seek the crevices deep between their heavy breasts that sway beneath the cows they bend to milk eyes. Won't you have another drink from my silty yonder eyes? I may look plain, but I've got roses in my blood, can bloom right out the soil of these here brackish eyes, wander a limb across the chest of your country, unlock the footlocker of your desire with the tip of my vine eyes. Thanks. And can I just say one more thing? For me, Marlboro was basically the bridge between high school, where I really felt like doing nothing, right? Because I didn't like it there, and sort of and recognizing my intellectual self. And so when Kevin was talking about this new Renaissance scholar thing, which is like so exciting, I immediately thought, why am I not thinking about the younger people who might be candidates for this? And I immediately contacted my babysitter, who's totally brilliant. So I hope that you all will do the same and actively seek potential applicants.